Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ohio State Buckeyes Call-In Show. I'm your host for the evening, Ryan Stano. Unfortunately, Garrison is feeling under the weather, so he could not join it. So it'll be just me doing the call-in show this evening. So, as we typically do, love to hear from you guys. So anything you guys want to talk about, I can certainly talk about. Go ahead and I can drop the link here as well for the call in. So if anyone wants to call in and join me, you can certainly do so. There are a few things that I would like to talk about here off the top, though. Some pieces of news that have come up in recent days since me and Garrison last talked on Monday. So one of them being the interview that Ross Bjork actually gave this morning on here in local radio. He had an interview on 97.1 The Fan, Morning Juice, where he gave about a 20-minute interview with Bobby Carpenter and Jeff Thidoff. And they asked him some questions ranging from how they're preparing for the college football playoff, hosting the first ever December game in Ohio Stadium history, to Ryan Day's job status. And there are two particular points that I really want to hit. So the first point, he was asked about what Ohio Stadium is going to look like, how they are prepared for the first home game, first home playoff game in the history of this Ohio State football program. And he told us some things that, were going to be new to Ohio State fans. So one of the things that I found very interesting is the fact that this is not an Ohio State run production. This is a college football production, despite the fact that it's a home game for Ohio State. So what that means is there's going to be some stuff for Tennessee in there too, including the fact that they get a walk-in video when they come into the shoe, when they get on the field. So they'll have their own walk-up music, their own walk-up video. Obviously not something that's usually done when it's just a normal home game here at the shoe. So that's going to be strange. The fact that Tennessee is going to be treated more like a neutral party than they are a visitor, which doesn't make any sense because they are, in fact, the visitors. He also mentioned that there will be a drone show. So I'm assuming that will come at some point near halftime, along with the band. So there is going to be a lot of pyrotechnics during the game as well. And it will be a Scarlet Out. So anyone going to the game, make sure you wear everything scarlet. And the team itself will also be wearing their old scarlet uniforms. So found that all very interesting. And the Ohio State social media team teased that a little bit as well. Earlier in the week, they had teased that it was going to be a possible Scarlet Out. One of the other things, and really the main thing that caught my attention from his interview, was he was asked about Ryan Day's job status. And the specific question was whether or not, regardless of what happens on next Saturday, December 20th, or just in the playoffs in general, regardless of the result, will Ryan Day likely be back on the sideline next year when Texas shows up on the first game of the season? And the answer was yes. Ross Bjork said yes, and he said that there was really no thought to it. He mentioned how well he and Day have gotten along, how much they've hit it off since he's gotten to campus. And quite frankly, that doesn't bode well for the program, in my opinion. If you don't come into this game with an open mind that it could go south like it did against Michigan, and there's not going to be any consequences for what's happened these last few years, that's a bad sign. As you guys know, I have advocated for Day to be fired unless he is able to run the table here in the playoffs and deliver a national championship. He's 0-4 against Michigan. He has won one college football playoff game, and that was during COVID in 2020 when there was a 20% fan capacity at the in the Sugar Bowl at what is now the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans against Clemson. That's the only CFP win he's got. And he hasn't won a Big Ten title since 2020, that same year. So it's not like he's got a big resume, Yes, he's 1-4 against Michigan total, 0-4 in the last 4 years. So I don't think he deserves that long of a leash. It's not like he has won the really big games that he's coached in. He did win at Penn State this year, and he did win against Indiana this year. Both were top 5 teams. He deserves credit for that. You lose that credit when you lose to what was a 6-5 Michigan team coming into the shoe. That is the worst Michigan team we've seen, that Ohio State has seen, and a good decade and a half, maybe since their 2013 team, probably their 2012 team. And because they didn't play in 2020 because Michigan went ahead and canceled. That was their worst team that they've had in a while, but obviously Ohio State didn't see them then. So that's a problem, especially when all the talk this year has been about winning against Michigan, winning a Big Ten championship, and winning a national championship. And that brings me to the final thing I wanted to talk about with Bjork's interview. He, in so many words, basically said that Ryan Day isn't the problem. It's you, the Ohio State fan, that is the problem. Our expectations are too high for this program. We need to, instead of focusing on end results, we need to focus more on the process. Those were his words. He said the process is what matters. The end result isn't quite what matters. That's an insane take. He's an athletic director. He gets paid based off of results. If the coaches in his program don't have the results, then the programs that he oversees are not going to bring in the money that he needs to see. And therefore, his compensation goes down too. The fact that he would say the end results don't matter is baffling. And Ross Bjork has not been on the job very long. He took the job full-time in July after Gene Smith retired. So it's been less than 6 months. I don't think that he should be saying these things this soon into the job. It's a sure way to get the fans pissed off at you in a hurry. And Kevin, yes, he did say that. He went ahead and said that. I can drop the link here in the chat of the full interview if you guys want to listen to it. It was a 20-minute interview, and this was actually only the second question that he got asked. So it was, very early on in the interview where he talks about Ryan Day's job security and then the fact that fans have too high of expectations. Mind you, it wasn't the fans that set the expectations to begin with. The team is the one that set the expectations. Ryan Day himself has said it multiple years on the job that the 3 goals for the Ohio State program every year are to beat Michigan, win a Big Ten championship, and win a national championship. So far, he has failed in those regards in the last 4 years. Well, okay, let me rephrase. In 2020, he did win a Big Ten championship. So he did that. But I guess, no, you know what? I guess in the last 4 years, because 21, 22, 23, this is the 4th year. You lost to Michigan again this year. You didn't win the Big Ten championship. You still have a shot to win a national championship. I'm not sure if that's something, that is ultimately going to happen. We can talk about that here later. But those were the expectations that he has set. The players came out and said, here's, the link. You can check the comments. This is the link to the interview that he said. And Kevin, you're exactly right. Burke opened the season with natty or bust. That's exactly what the players did. And Burke wasn't the only player. He might have been the most vocal player. But Will Howard, when he came in out of the transfer portal, he said he understands the expectations. He understands that this is a natty or bust type of season with the roster that Ohio State had assembled. And so for Bjork to say that the fans' expectations are too high, quite frankly, is asinine. Those are the fans that your own team set forth. Those are the expectations that your team vocalized to the fans. So don't get on the fans. It's the team and it's the coach. And we're starting to learn early here that Bjork and Ted Carter might be a problem. There are some other things with Ted Carter that I won't get into here right now because those aren't football specific that might lead us to realize that he may not be the best president at the moment. Again, he's early in his tenure too as the president, but his hire of Ross Bjork wasn't super great. So, we'll see what happens. And here it is Bjork really putting his job in jeopardy? Right now, no. Ted Carter, that was his first big hire. He's not even a year on the job. He has made 2 huge hires, though, here early on in his tenure. He hired Jake Diebler as the Ohio State men's basketball coach. This is his first full year of that job. So far, the reviews have been mixed. The results, they've been up and down. But, that makes sense when you're a first-time head coach and you're playing with a roster that's entirely new. So we'll see what happens there. And he's made some other hires. He hired a new baseball coach this year as well. Again, this past year, we'll see what those results are. Again, early hires. Ryan Day is a hire from Gene Smith, so he gets. Initially, I didn't think he was going to get a pass because Gene kind of held his hand. He was Ryan Day was his baby. It was the baby that he inherited from Urban Meyer. And I thought as long as Gene was going to be there, Day was also going to be there because he gave him an extension that he, quite frankly, didn't really deserve and didn't need. And all that did now is drive the buyout price higher. The buyout is somewhere in the ballpark of $37 million. And that's probably partially what this decision comes down to, is that buyout number. That's clearly not a number that the Ohio State administrators want to pay. The only way that I see them wanting to pay it is if the NIL donors pony up some money to help do it. And that could happen if the results don't happen, this season. I think ultimately the only way that Day is going to get let go at this point, based on the smoke signals I've seen from Bjork, is if the donors stop sending in money and say, hey, you know what? I'm not paying money for these kids to come in and still get coached by this guy who can't win big games, can't beat Michigan. That would be the only way that I see Bjork getting rid of Day at this point. I will say, to play devil's advocate here, in this interview, what else is Bjork going to say, 10 days before Ohio State plays in the playoffs? Yeah, I'm going to fire Day if he doesn't win this game. Come on. The transfer portal is now open. He can't really put forth a comment like that to make it seem like Day is a lame duck coach. He's got to play this a little bit more politically savvy. So, in his defense, you could make an argument that he is protecting Day because of that. But that is no reason to say that the fans' expectations are too high. Just simply say, yeah, Day will be back. Don't turn it around on the fans, That's stupid no matter which way you put it, quite frankly. So, you can really put it out either way. And before I move on here, to my next point, if there's anything you guys want to hear me talk about, put it in the chat. I'll gladly talk about it. I went ahead and put the link in here as well if you guys want to call in as well, chat with me live on here. I'd be happy to do that. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is some transfer portal tracking. So as of now, Ohio State doesn't have any commits from the transfer portal. And, we'll see where that ends up. They've got a couple guys that they like. One of the guys that they like is actually a tackle who they've reached out to. He's actually the number 1 tackle in the transfer portal, and it's Isaiah World. Isaiah World is from Nevada. He's 6'8", 309. He's a big kid, and he spent a lot of time at Nevada. So he has a lot of teams who are interested in him, which, they should be. He's a really good player. He's someone who can plug and play there at left tackle, which Ohio State needs with the fact that Josh Simmons is going to the NFL draft, which he should. So they're going to need a new left tackle. The offensive line depth right now is not great, as we can see. So they're going to need to go into the portal and get a few guys, and World is one of them. They're also getting some interest from Purdue safety Dylan Thieneman. Dylan Thieneman has been he's been a really solid guy so far in his career. Even though he's played at Purdue, he is an all Big Ten player. And actually, I've got a little bit of an insight to him. His brothers actually played at my high school, and he's from my hometown. Now, he didn't play at my high school. He ended up playing at the public school local there, who could give him more eyeballs as far as recruiting opportunities are concerned. But as you can see, he's a tackling machine. Now, you can argue, hey, do we really need someone who makes 100 tackles coming from safety? I wouldn't say so. Now, Caleb Downs had that many when he came from Alabama, so that helps. But this is the number right here, the 6 interceptions. He's someone who can, get the ball, and, he's, especially with the talent surrounding him, he won't have to do it all. This year, he's regressed a little bit, hasn't been quite as impressive, but he's someone that would help the overall depth at safety. So and that's going to be necessary with Lathan Ransom, taking off. So those are 2 main guys that they're looking at that are also interested in a center from Virginia Tech. He's actually, fairly interested in Ohio State. That is Braylon Moore. Braylon Moore started at Virginia Tech for multiple years. And if Ohio State reaches out to him, he said he'd be interested. It's unclear right now if Ohio State has reached out to him yet, but they would be interested in, they would certainly be interested in taking him. They can't really be choosy when it comes to the transfer portal and offensive linemen. They're also looking at Josh Thompson, who's a guard from Northwestern. He is also one of the top offensive linemen in the transfer portal. Ohio State is just kind of any top-rated offensive lineman. Yeah, here, we're interested. Come play in Columbus. So, again, that's why Ross can't necessarily say all of those things. So, there's a comment here from Kevin. A lot of the voices of college football are counting out the Buckeyes against Tennessee. I'm not sure I agree with that. I've seen more than a few Ohio State, their commentators say that Ohio State can win this game. The odds makers in Vegas certainly think so. The team opened up at a 7.5-point favorite. We talked about it a little bit, on Monday, and, just over here the past weekend, on various shows here we've done. Garrison and I talked about it here on Monday. The key to beating Tennessee is going to be neutralizing their defensive line. Ohio State did a horrendous job of that against Michigan. As everyone knows, the game plan should not have been to try to just run up the middle at the strength of Michigan's team. And that's exactly what Ryan Day and Chip Kelly decided to do. Day has mentioned in his press conferences since that they will do anything necessary to win the game. If that means throwing it 50 times, they'll do it. I don't think they need to throw it 50, but they're going to need to threaten the outside more than what they did against Michigan. Tennessee's defensive backs are good. I wouldn't say they're great. They're certainly not on the level of what Ohio State, of what the offense goes against in practice every day. I mean, they're not as good as Denzel Burke or Davison Igbinosun, even though both of them have their individual warts. So Ohio State can throw on this team. They can certainly put up yards and score points if they want to make passing the ball a primary part of their game plan. Now they're going to have to keep balance. They're not going to throw 50 times. They are going to run the ball with Henderson and Judkins. If nothing else, then to just set up the play action pass. But they can't just bang their head against a brick wall and keep running it up the middle. If anything, they need to run to the outside. They need to pull some guards, get some of these guys out in space, specifically Carson Hinsman. He's a good guard. I wouldn't say he's a great center, but he's a good guard. If they move him to guard and keep him at left guard right next to Donovan Jackson and pull him out to the outside, then they can get in. He can get into the second level, and Ohio State can run with a little bit of space. Now, the problem with that is, are they going to be able to move him to guard? Does Ohio State have enough at center for that to happen? And I do think they will revamp the offensive line. I do think Josh Padilla is likely going to start at center, and they'll probably move Hinsman back to left guard. They'll probably keep Jackson at left tackle, Fryer at right tackle. They might move Sierreveld to right guard. Shabola has not been good. At times, Sierreveld has not been good. So whichever guard, I guess, practices less poorly, that's who's going to get the start at right guard. Because what they did last week against Michigan is not sustainable. The offensive line had no push. They weren't able to push Michigan off their spots. They did okay in pass coverage, but the run blocking, quite simply, was unacceptable. And they can't have that against a Tennessee front that's also very good. Are we ever going to hear from Chip Kelly? I would think not. He, when they make him available, let me put it this way. When Ohio State has good offensive games, they make him available. When they don't, he kind of hides. So I would not expect to hear from him. Maybe there's a chance you hear from him next week, during press conference. I wouldn't hold your breath. Chip is one of those guys who wants to control everything around him. That's how he's run his programs when he's been head coach. And so he's not going to want to open himself up for any criticism or anything like that. He obviously, I would love to hear from him personally. He's got a lot of questions that I would like to see answered. But I don't think Day is going to put him in that position. Day talked about last week that he puts all of the blame on him, which is what he should say. He is the head coach. The buck does stop with him. He's not wrong. But he was trying to cover for Kelly a little bit. But again, if you see what's happening out there on the field, you're an offensive play caller too. Why not take over, get some different play calls in there, and stop just running it up the gut, and then, a draw on third down. So, and if he did do that, then that makes things even worse for Day. So, long answer, I would say we're probably not going to hear from Chip Kelly at any point. Now, you might hear from Jim Knowles. Knowles, I'll give Knowles credit. Knowles is they bring Knowles out for availability, whether the defense is good or not. And I think that's good accountability. Knowles understands the assignment. When he got hired, he said, the expectations are high here. I understand that. That's why I'm getting paid what I'm getting paid. And that's why you coach in place here. Because, pressure creates diamonds. So Knowles understands what it takes to be successful here. Now, you can quibble whether or not the system he runs is something that the roster on Ohio State is suited for. I don't know. Obviously, there was that struggle with him and Larry Johnson to get the defensive line to do what Knowles wanted to do versus what Johnson wanted to do. So there was some disagreement there. But since the Oregon game, the defense has largely been a lot better. So props to Knowles. So, and are we sure Kelly was responsible for the game plan? I mean, he is the offensive coordinator. He's called every play this year. Day was going to be hands off with that, so he can be more of a CEO type of head coach and kind of, run the program from afar. I would assume Kelly is the guy who has been calling all the plays until noted otherwise, until Ryan Day or Chip Kelly come out and say, yeah, you know what? It was actually Day who was calling the plays. Until that happens, I'm going to assume it was Chip Kelly. Now, that's not to say that all of Kelly's games have been bad this year. That's obviously not true. The offense was just really, really bad against Michigan. And I think it's because, and me and Garrison talked about it, this game's just in his head. he thinks that he has to be the most physical team in order to beat Michigan. And historically, the records say that. Ohio State and Michigan, the rushing leader in that game, typically has won the game in the last 20 years or so. That doesn't mean that's what you should do when the thing Michigan does best is stop the run. So, we don't really need to rehash that. We've talked about that, quite a lot. But I would say Kelly is responsible for that. So, well, I don't know if he will scapegoat some of his assistants. I think Day will probably just kind of eat it. And I don't know what, and like I mentioned at the start of the show, it sounds like Day's got some job security with Bjork anyway. So he's not going to need to blame the assistants because it sounds like he'll be back regardless of what happens, which is infuriating. I don't think that is the correct thing, but it is what it is. So let's say we run the gauntlet of the playoffs. Which game do you think will end up being the toughest? So, yeah, let's do some hypothetical looking ahead. I don't typically like to do that, especially with what we saw against Michigan, knowing that this team is not in a position to look ahead on anybody. But we're fans, so we can. I don't think Tennessee is the toughest team. I think Oregon is gettable. We saw that when Ohio State played them the first time. Oregon's defense is certainly, and we saw that in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon's defense, points can be put on them. I mean, Penn State put 38 on them. And Penn State did score an offensive touchdown against Ohio State when they played them at home. So Oregon is definitely beatable. If Ohio State can beat Tennessee and they actually show some signs of life with the offensive game plan, showing that they'll actually target Jeremiah Smith more than twice and a half, they'll get the ball to Mekabuka out in space and have some actual creative play calls, they can beat Oregon too. The defense was rebuilt specifically because of what Oregon did to them. So I think Oregon would not be the toughest game. Now, if they would end up beating Oregon, I do think they would likely end up facing Texas. And Texas has always concerned me. Their losses have been to Georgia. The two losses to Georgia weren't good, especially in the SEC championship game after Carson Beck went down. And that's part of the reason why I don't fear Georgia. Carson Beck's down. Not that he was that good to begin with, but Gunnar Stockton doesn't have any sort of experience. I don't see him pulling a Cardale Jones and leading that team to a national title. I just don't. But Texas, they can beat you in a variety of ways. Like, they can still run the ball fairly well. Quinn has proven in his tenure at Texas that he doesn't actually have that strong of an arm. I think part of it, was after his freshman year, they quote unquote fixed his mechanics to be more mechanically sound. And I think they took some juice off of his fastball. So those far, those opposite field throws, they don't get there with any juice. They're kind of wounded ducks sometimes, which is why I think Ohio State would have a chance against Texas. But they can run the ball, and they can indeed bring in Arch Manning with a package. They run him, and obviously he started a few games for him when Quinn went down, so we know he can throw the ball too. So I think that would be a tougher matchup. Their defense is nothing to sneeze at either. They've got a pretty tough defense. And their special teams, unlike Ohio State's, are actually fairly sound. So I do think Texas would be a tough team to beat. I think Texas is probably the toughest team for Ohio State in this college football playoff, based on how the bracket would shake out. I am curious to see how Notre Dame plays in round one against Indiana, because I think Notre Dame can cause certain matchup problems for Ohio State as well. If Notre Dame does, and Ohio State wouldn't face them until, the national championship, possibly, just based on how the bracket shakes out. Notre Dame, like Texas, they've got a mobile quarterback with Riley Leonard. They can run the ball. They've got an offensive line that really fires off the line of scrimmage. So they would be able to, I think they'd probably be able to push Ohio State's defensive line back. Their defensive line is fairly stout as well. And Marcus Freeman, he wants revenge for what Ohio State did to him in the last couple of seasons. So that would be a team that would be slightly concerning. I still think Ohio State would likely beat them, especially having gone through the gauntlet in order to get there of Tennessee, Oregon, and so have you. So, to answer the initial question, I think Texas is probably going to be the toughest game if Ohio State even makes it past this first round against Tennessee. Now, I do want to address this. Yes, the lawmaker who created that stupid law for making it a felony to plant a flag in Ohio Stadium. He knew the law wasn't going to pass. It was in a lame duck session here in Ohio. So obviously that was something that was not going to pass fast enough. And quite frankly, he is a fan of other Michigan sports. He's a Detroit Lions fan. He's up in Toledo. I don't know if he is an Ohio State fan. I don't know if he's a Michigan fan. But what his excuse was, he wanted to bring some attention to something that he feels is unsafe. He calls it a safety issue. I don't see it that way. And quite frankly, if you don't want the opposing team planting their flag in your midfield, win the game. That's a surefire way to make sure that doesn't happen. Win the freaking game. Ohio State hasn't done that the last couple times. They've faced Michigan at the shoe, and that's why the flag has been planted the last couple times. Do I like that they planted the flag? Absolutely not. But they won the game. They have the right to do it. So that's my thoughts on that. My thoughts on this. Justin Fry will be gone. I don't know. I can only hope so. If any of you guys caught the show on Monday with me and Garrison, you know my thoughts on Fry. He is not recruited to the level that he needs to. He's not pulled in a single 5-star recruit. He hasn't coached these guys on the depth chart to the level where the depth is where it needs to be. I mean, that's the whole reason why they're shuffling the offensive line, because they have no depth. Yes, losing your starting center and your starting left tackle in any season for any team is going to be tough. But to have to reshuffle their offensive line 3-4 times this season, even really since the injury, is a problem. That tells you that they don't have players that they trust. That's the bigger problem. If Fry was good at his job, he would have guys back in there in which he could trust to throw out here in a game against Michigan, a game against Indiana, or a game here against Tennessee that he think would do reasonably well. It doesn't sound like they do. So if Day was smart, he would can Fry. We'll see what happens here in the transfer portal. Maybe he gets the top-rated guys in the transfer portal. Maybe that saves his ass. I mean, quite frankly, it's probably what saved his ass this past offseason. Landing Seth McLaughlin from the transfer portal as the number one center coming out, from Alabama. He was obviously a very good get. He would be, he was great until he went down. So, I don't know. I would prefer someone else, but we'll see what happens. If if Ohio State loses to Tennessee this weekend, I want Day gone too. So obviously Fry would be canned in that scenario too. But it sounds like that's not going to happen. I would not buy tickets to a future game. I would not do that. I have some friends here in Columbus that bought tickets to the Big Ten championship game prior to the game against Michigan. That was obviously not smart. They actually ended up going to the game, and because they had tickets and they couldn't sell them for what they were worth the time that they bought them. So I would be wary of that. I know I understand you live in California. I would be super weary of that, because if this team plays like they played against Michigan, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to lose to Tennessee at home, and it's going to be ugly. It'll be a worse score than what it was against Michigan, because Tennessee can actually throw the football. Michigan can't. So that's what would happen. Yeah, here, David, I agree with you. The problem with Stud, I don't think he was an awful offensive line coach. What ended up happening was he ended up getting a little bit lazy in recruiting later in his tenure. And those big-time recruits that he was landing, they kind of stopped coming. I mean, Paris Johnson Jr. was a huge get for him. 5-star recruit. Obviously, a can't-miss prospect. He was top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And then once he was done with him, as far as that recruiting goes, those top-level recruits kind of went away, and Fry has not even been able to get up to that level. So, yeah, I definitely think it was a downgrade for Justin Fry to get Justin Fry, but I don't really know what the alternative is here. Coming into the year, I was hopeful that Chip Kelly would be able to get the most out of Justin Fry since Fry was employed by Kelly at UCLA, but that hasn't really been the case. Now, the offensive line played well early in the year, really until Simmons went down. But again, it's the depth issue. This is a problem that has been stewing, that really stems from the last couple of years. The fact that they weren't able to get the numbers where they needed to be on the offensive line, just getting the sheer number of players at different offensive line positions. That was the biggest problem. And now we're here at a point where they don't trust people on the offensive line. They mentioned that if they were going to reshuffle, Luke Montgomery was a guy that could end up playing. Josh Padilla is a guy that could end up playing. And I like Montgomery. When he was coming out of high school, coming out of Findlay, I really liked him. And I still do. But to say that now, possibly the final game of the year in a first-round playoff matchup, that's when we're really going to see if Montgomery has what it takes. That's not a good thing. So, yeah, personally, I would like someone with Fry here at the end of the year. If you guys have anything else you guys want me to talk about, feel free to drop in the chat. Definitely talk about it. You can scroll up in the chat. There is a link there to join me up here if that's for the actual call-in part of the show. You can certainly do that. Would love to hear from you guys as well. But what I do also want to talk about is where we think this Ohio State football program is going forward from here. So after this game, they potentially will move on and play Oregon, or the season's over and the players in the transfer portal start ramping up. Ohio State would start losing a lot more players to the transfer portal. Quite frankly, I think that's why we haven't seen I think that's why we've seen the numbers not quite even get up to double digits at this point, because the season isn't over yet. Once the season is officially over, I think there are some guys that are going to head in. And I talked about a few of the candidates with Garrison on Monday. Guys like C.J. Hicks, Lakin Kean-Holtz, Calvin Simpson-Hunt. Those are guys that I could see bolting for the portal, but they don't want to do that yet because there's technically still a chance that they could win a national championship. And, let's talk about if that is the future. Let's say Ohio State does run through the gauntlet here of this college football playoff. Let's say they do turn around, they win a national championship. Yeah, obviously, that is something everyone in this chat, me, all Ohio State fans would obviously welcome that. That is the ultimate goal. At that point, obviously, the talk for Ryan Day's job stops. He probably gets another 3 or 4 year cushion, and the program will continue business as usual. Their recruiting class didn't finish the strongest here in 2025. I can see that changing in 2026 if this team does win a national championship. There probably would still be some changes with the assistant coaches. I think Fry would probably be gone anyway. I think he would probably be the only. You could make an argument Larry Johnson could be on his way out the door. I don't think it would be a straight firing. I think Ryan Day would maybe say, hey, look, Larry, your service to this program has been great, but don't you think it's time to retire? Be one of those conversations. And then they would go ahead and replace both line coaches and kind of move forward from there. Now, let's say Ohio State doesn't do that. They don't win the national championship, whether they lose against Tennessee or Oregon or whoever. at that point, I don't like the direction that this program's going because Ryan Day would still be in charge. Yeah, I mean, at this point, the calls for Day's job have gotten pretty darn loud from a lot of Ohio State fans. And for a while, there were a lot of Ohio State fans. There are still some. I still see some on my Twitter timeline or X, whatever, that say, hey, Ryan Day's got a great winning percentage. He's only lost 11 games. Give the guy a break. He wins most of his games. Okay, look, when you come to Ohio State, there are 3 goals, and Day has mentioned those are the goals that he has. First and foremost, you got to beat that team up north. If you can't do that, get out of here. 2, Big Ten championships. You compete to win the conference. And 3, you win national championships. Now, obviously, you're not going to win a national championship every year. That's an unrealistic expectation. Even with the expanded Big Ten, I don't think winning a Big Ten championship every single year now at this point is probably realistic. I mean, obviously, Ohio State ran the Big Ten during Urban's heyday. But with teams like Oregon coming in, Washington, they're going to get better. USC is not going to be down for that long until they finally decide they're going to can Lincoln Riley. But as long as he sticks around, they'll probably be bad. And obviously, Michigan won't be that bad for that long. Penn State. They'll hopefully keep losing to Ohio State every year. But, a team like Indiana this year, that's the team that surprises in the Big Ten. My point is the Big Ten is only going to keep being a hard conference to play in. So, maybe not winning the Big Ten every year. It should necessarily be the barometer for a successful season. But you can be damn sure Ohio State has to make the 12-team playoff every year. There is no excuse not to make the 12-team playoff. With the resources that this program has, with the recruiting pipelines that they've built all across the country, with the traditions that they have. No matter who is coaching the team, there is no reason to not make the CFP. Day has been able to do that, but he has not been able to beat Michigan. And that's probably the most important thing to a lot of Ohio State fans. And if he continues to lead the program, I don't see how that changes. I don't see how he beats Michigan with the guys that he has brought in. And we're already looking at a team next year that is going to lose a lot of starters from this team. And it's not like the class of 2022 has exactly been a banger of a recruiting class either. That recruiting class right now looks like a gigantic miss. And it's pretty much from every player across the board. Like they don't have a whole lot of solid starters from that class that are even on this team. So the class of 2022 would be seniors next year. So right now, they're juniors. Let me read you off the players who are solid starters here in 2022 from the 2022 guys. Sonny Styles. I think he's been pretty solid here at points at linebacker. I think next year when he's actually after he's had a whole year at linebacker, I think he's going to be pretty good. So that was a hit. He was a 5-star recruit. Scrolling through the class, there's not really another guy who's a banger of a starter. Carson Hinsman, I think if you keep him at guard, I actually think he's a pretty solid guard. So that's 2 starters from this class so far. Other guys in this class, CJ Hicks, I just said he's a candidate for transfer. When he's been out there, he hasn't been good. Unless they use him as like a defensive end edge rusher, he's not going to be a guy that is going to be effective. We've already seen him at linebacker. He really doesn't contain the edge well in run plays. He's not disciplined enough to do it. He's not good in space to make tackles either. So unless they do that, I would consider him a bust. Tegra Shabola. You've seen how poorly he's played this year on the offensive line. Ryan Day's talking about possibly replacing him along the offensive line. So I wouldn't say he's necessarily a bona fide starter either. And then these other guys, Devin Brown, entered the transfer portal. Keon Graves, transfer portal. Caleb Burton, transfer portal. Amari Bohr, transfer portal. Caleb Brown, been gone, transfer portal. The only 2 other guys who I could see being possible beneficiaries of some more playing time and some solid players for Ohio State would be Kenyatta Jackson who has had his moments this year. I think he's played pretty well in certain spots. And Caden Curry, who I think has actually been very solid as a defensive rotation guy. And he's been a banger on special teams. So I think those guys are good. I like Hero Canoe. He hasn't gotten the playing time to really show me anything. So I mentioned maybe 5 or 6 guys on both sides of the ball that might be able to help this team. And if you noticed, most of those players are on defense. The only offensive player I mentioned is Carson Hintzman, and he's an offensive lineman. The other offensive players from this class. Shabola, just talked about him. Not great. Devin Brown, going to be in the transfer portal, never started here. Caleb Brown, transfer portal. He's entering it again for the second time after being over there in Iowa. Caleb Burton, transfer portal after 1 year. Kojo Antwi, just entered the transfer portal too. Another wide receiver gone. George Fitzpatrick, they clearly don't trust him to be part of the offensive line reshuffle. Although Ryan Day did mention his name briefly during his press conference, has not done well to be in that scenario. Dallin Hayden, transfer to Colorado, so he's in transfer portal. Benny Christian, not great when he's been out there. He's had a few penalties and a few drops. You know, they're better off playing G. Scott, and they'd be playing more Will Kasmerick as well if he were healthy enough to actually play. Instead, Bennett's had to be out there in some two tight end sets. And Avery Henry is the last guy, which unfortunately he didn't really get to show what we do because of his unfortunate cancer diagnosis. So he gets a pass. But as you can see, it's not like the offensive line was or the offensive players from that class are certified bangers, you know. So the future, this is really a crossroads for this program. Depending on how they do in this playoff, you know, a lot of things could happen. And we still don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be next year. With Howard moving on, it's obviously, you know, the conventional thought is it's going to be probably Julian Sayin, but it's between him, Aaron Nolan, and Tavian St. Clair, the incoming freshman. Don't know who's going to win that job. Like I said, I think Sayin's probably the favorite, but you don't know. And it's not like Day decided to give him reps as the backup to really show what he can do, or even get just again, some live game reps that would have really helped. Instead, he decided to trot out Devin Brown, who, you know, he probably knew he was going to transfer. And, you know, Lincoln Kean-Holtz, I could see him, you know, he's probably out the door too. So, not exactly sure what the future holds here. If anybody's got anything else they would like to hear me, you know, talk about, or, you know, join me here, please drop it in the comments section. And otherwise here, I'm going to wrap it up here shortly. Really just one more topic that I wanted to kind of cover here before like I said, we wrap it up. And that is what former Buckeye Andre Turrentine had to say. For those that don't know, Turrentine is a former Ohio State defensive back. He actually transferred after just 1 year with the Buckeyes back in 2021. And he transferred to Tennessee. So he's been a defensive back in reserve, always safety. When asked how loud the shoe gets, he laughed and said, it doesn't get loud up in the shoe like it does in the SEC. He compared the shoe unfavorably. He compared them unfavorably to Arkansas. Arkansas, a mid-tier SEC program. He also compared them unfavorably to South Carolina. I mean, that's frankly, it's quite ridiculous. He didn't mention like LSU. Okay, you could give me LSU. You could give me Alabama. You could even give me Texas A&M. Those three places are tough places to play. Those places are loud all the time. If you want to throw in Georgia, sure. But Arkansas, South Carolina, give me a freaking break. Obviously, he's just trying to juice up his own team and saying, oh, yeah, we're not worried about the noise or anything, but that should be a challenge to Ohio State football fans. If you're going to the game, make sure you're as loud as you possibly can be throughout the entire game, because they've got a freshman quarterback out there who, in my opinion, has not played in an environment like this. It's going to be, right now, the forecast, it's pretty far out to really determine what's going to happen, but it looks like it's going to be cold. Now, Knoxville is further north than some of the other SEC schools, so I don't think the weather is going to play a massive factor. But the noise should. So if you're at the game, scream as loud as you can, prove Andre wrong, and show that Ohio State is indeed a top 5 environment in college football. Is Arkansas even mid-tier? Depends on the year. Really depends on the year. I wouldn't say they're normally a mid-tier program, but your point is well taken. And again, even more of an insult to Ohio State fans that he would compare them to Arkansas. So, that was really the last thing I wanted to cover was that former Buckeye just saying that about the fans. So, yeah, that's pretty much it here for the call-in show. Thank you to everyone that participated, putting stuff into the chat. Greatly appreciate you guys. Our next show is going to be on Monday. Garrison should be back for that. Be Monday at 8 o'clock again. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more transfer portal news to talk about. And we'll have some more recruiting news to talk about. And, we'll definitely we'll dive into more of the Tennessee game. I know he's also been watching more film as I have over the course of this week. Was excited to talk to him about that today. Unfortunately, like I said, he was feeling under the weather. So, we'll talk about that on Monday, and we'll see you guys then. So, OH, IO.